this sutta talks about true yogic practice. Like, what can we do to come to a place of self-realization? It's basically tannirodha, which means cessation of those mind fluctuations, cessation of your thoughts. And it is the first sutra that talks about what can you do to realize the self? What can you do? And that's actually also what yoga ultimately is. It isn't those asanas. It isn't the jumping around. It is really about an ancient path of enlightenment. And that's what these Yoga Sutras are about. And that's why I'm bringing them in, because they are actually presenting eternal knowledge. They're presenting an eternal wisdom source. And that wisdom source is not focused on the body. It is talking about the true self. And so this sutta is talking about how can we even start? What can we even do? What can you practice to come to a place of realizing what you are in truth? That is what the sutra talks. Now, the sutra gives two things that are essential if you really want to know what you are. And it says abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa is practice. Now, the practice that is talked about here, again, is not a physical practice. It isn't about physical practice at all. It isn't about the egoic self at all. What is talked about is a practice that leads to tannirodha. It means it is a practice that is focused on how can you detach from the mind. This is what we're talking about. And all the ways how abhyasa practice in Sanskrit is actually defined is that it is not an external practice. It isn't a practice anymore that has to do with you doing something externally focused. It is always a practice that is focused on what is abhimukena. It means an interior face. It means that practice is something that is asphuvi. It means something that stabilizes you in your internal self. This is really important. Practice is something that stabilizes you in your internal self. Nowadays, you would say practice is abiding as the self. If you read all the ancient commentaries, they're always talking about this intimate connection to yourself. That is a true practice. The true practice is every and any time you are abiding as the self. Any and every time you are connected to your true self. That is abhyasa. That is yogic practice. It has nothing to do with what is usually known as a yogic practice. It has everything to do with the realization of the self. It has everything to do with the true goal of yoga, and not just an idea or whatever interpretations have come in the last centuries. It is really the path inside we are talking about. And the other term it uses is vairagya. Raga is desire. Vairagya is the detachment from desire. So the practice is the detachment from the desires. What is the detachment from the desire? It is the detachment from the identification with thought, because ultimately desires are what leads us into certain thoughts. Everything you're thinking about all day is connected to a certain desire to find yourself, a certain desire to identify, a certain desire for certain themes, a certain desire for certain ideas or objects you're having. So that's what your thoughts revolve around. All the objects of your desire, everything you desire in life. If you think about what is it you're thinking about, there's mostly the objects of your desire, whatever your desires revolve around. So vairagya is the detachment. So practice and detachment, these two kind of things. When do we have that? When you're abiding as the self, you are naturally detached from objects. There's the automatic detachment from the world of form, from the ephemeral nature of reality. That is automatically happening in the moment of true practice. Now, how do you do that? It is literally, the practice is abiding as the self. It is a different form of meditation. It is you literally witnessing, starting to witness thoughts and not going into any thought. It is already actually detaching. You're learning to stay without forms. Whatever is appearing, you're staying out of it. You are practicing alertness. You are practicing awake essence or beingness, or however you want to call it. That's what you're going to practice. You're practicing not following any form, not following any track, and you're remaining with the self. That is the true practice. The true practice is you remaining devoid, remaining as it is. You're not taking on. It involves seeing the mind. And it is a true practice because in the beginning, you will see how difficult it is not to follow thought. The mind will try to get you. The mind will try to lead you. And the mind will come up more and more with your most intricate, most intimate desires to still get you into mainstream, to still get you somewhere, to still have you identified. It will find more and more what is raga, your desires. What are your thoughts that are really heavily entrenched with your identification, that you're heavily entangled in actually. And you are staying devoid. You are remaining without. You are not following whatever appears actually. And it is you learning to be with the self. That is true yogic practice. That is your practice. The more and more you do that, the more there is a distance to the ephemeral world, the more there is a distance to whatever is appearing. The more you're actually abiding, the more your practice as abiding as the self is stabilized as it is. And so that is this Yogasutra, and it is the truest form of yogic practice. It is you remaining as the self. It is you learning what the self actually is and remaining without and staying detached from thoughts, from whatever appears, from whatever you are you are invested in usually. Like usually you are in these mind streams. You're learning to stay devoid. And that's the beauty. And then can you see what is already still? So it isn't about the mind being still, it is ultimately the discovery what in you is changeless, what in you is already silent, what in you isn't involved in mind stream, but stays detached from all of what appears at any time.